This session is about the future. It starts now as we walk out the door. I'm Tom MacTavish. I'm a professor at the Institute of Design. I teach interaction design, and I research persuasive design. And I've been in the human-computer interaction industry for about 25 years. So that's a little bit about me and my background. I worked for 10 years here at ID, and prior to that I was in industry. So I'd like my fellow panelists up here to introduce themselves so you get to know us a little bit better. Go ahead.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Francois Millord. I have a very interesting data story, very cool data story to start off with. When I made the mistake of looking at my bio in the book, I realized that I'm really happy that my 3-year-old son, Sebastian, can't read. Because it says I've got 2 kids, Stefan and Guszcza. They're twins, they're both 6 years old. And Sebastian's 3 years old. Then I realized I probably forgot to give, or my assistant forgot to give the bio to Ruth. And we're in the data era, right? So they did the right thing. They went online, they found the next best bio, and they got it, I think from the Vitality Institute probably. Found the Vitality Institute, I did that about 5 years ago, and here I am. So I come from Vitality. We're part of the Discovery Group, started in South Africa. I'm an actuary, and given I'm going first, I'm going to steal some of Jim's thunder. Jim's also an actuary. So I think we're actually making actuarial history here, and we've got to get it on camera, because I don't think there's probably ever been an actuary at a design session.
and we decided that we're going to argue with each other, but we won't make eye contact while we're doing it.
Yeah. And to have 2 on a panel is actually quite unbelievable. But I'll talk you through a bit more about what we do. It will come out throughout the panel. We really are about changing insurance around the world, putting health first. I'll specifically talk about how I see health design and technology in health changing in future years, and hope you are interested in that. Just finally, because we've got 2 actuaries, people generally think actuaries can tell what's going to happen in the future, right? We price insurance products that's going to last for 30, 40, 50 years. But we also, as actuaries, we know we're always going to be wrong. Like any assumptions we make today about the long term is definitely going to be wrong. It's just the extent to which we are wrong that matters. That's actually pretty important in the data world. And I think it's been mentioned earlier today, is there's very sophisticated models that we're starting to see and that have evolved over many years. People tend to look at the results as, okay, we believe the results, that's what's going to happen, the model's accurate. It's not true. And I think that's one of the great things that we from the actuarial profession look at it and say, at least we know that the models are always going to be wrong.
Hi, I'm Shrupti Shah. I'm from Deloitte, and I lead our behavioral insights practice with a focus on government. And so I work with government agencies in the US, but also around the world, to help them harness the benefits or the potential of behavioral insights to improve policies and programs and public outcomes in the communities. So that's kind of my area. My other kind of key area is on measuring hard to measure things, so whether a community is feeling better about itself or the impact of diplomatic efforts when there's no counterfactual. So I specialize in measuring odd, quirky things.
And I'm quirky, so we're going to get along really well. No. So my name is Jim Guszcza. My title is Chief Data Scientist for Deloitte Consulting in the US, which is kind of Deloitte's polite way of saying I'm the oldest surviving data scientist. I've been there since 2001. This is old home week for me. I got my PhD in philosophy at the University of Chicago. Became an actuary out of grad school because I wanted to be what we now call a data scientist, but that term didn't exist back then. And I just thought this is like an interesting way to do it. I've been sort of part of that history. I've kind of brought a lot of machine learning methods into the actuarial profession. These terms are all inadequate. In my opinion, the data science community, don't quote me on this, has been kind of moving in more of a computer science direction in recent years. You know, now that we have big data, and big data is really giving rise to artificial intelligence now. Maybe we can talk about AI a little bit on this panel discussion. The reason we have artificial intelligence now is not because we have miraculous new algorithms that people have developed. Deep learning is a rebranding of neural networks. And the deep means there are more hidden layers, so more interactions between variables, essentially. What's changed is this, right? Now, if everybody's uploading photographs into Facebook, each photograph is a row in a database. The Y variables are, is this a picture of a cat or a table? And what are the X variables? Pixels, right? They're regression models, right? But in these cases, the data is so rich that you can almost mistake it for the world. You don't have to, but as Francois said, we actuaries, it's kind of bread into our bone. We work with very messy data, and Shrupti works with quirky, really, really messy data, wickedly messy data. But folks like us kind of have this kind of like bred in the mode sense that sometimes the data is actually, an imperfect mirror of the world. Sometimes the process of generating the data is not the same as the scenario that you're going to apply the model to. And that was the secret to why Google flu trends failed. Other times, the data will contain patterns that you don't want your algorithm to pick up. Or it'll contain too few patterns. So for example, if you train a deep learning neural net model on a lot of photographs of white people, it won't recognize black faces. There's a graduate student at MIT Media Lab who was sitting in front of her friend's computer, and her friend's webcam picked up her friend's face. And she sat down on her friend's computer, wouldn't pick up her face. And she's from Africa. And she put a white mask, a featureless white mask on her face, and all of a sudden picked up her face. So these are all examples, age-old examples, and new ones, right? This is all Truman versus Dewey. If you poll people over the phone in the 1930s, who are you going to vote for president, and only the rich people own telephones, you're going to get the wrong answer. So these kind of sampling frame problems, these kind of age-old issues in the social sciences, are kind of, it needs to be kind of rediscovered in AI and data science. And more recently, I've gotten interested in another aspect of social science, which is like, how do you act on model indications? How do you bridge that gap between algorithm output and better outcome? The classical way to do that is classical economics, give people information they didn't have before, or give them carrot and stick incentives. The behavioral economic way to think about this is, can we change the environment? Can we change the situation? Can we nudge people? Can we introduce design tweaks in the environment that prompt better outcomes? So that's another aspect of social sciences that I've gotten interested in at Deloitte. And Shrupti and I have been working together on bringing applied behavioral economics into our data science practice. So that's what I'm up to.
Okay, thanks. So I think it's pretty clear from today's discussion that we're now living in a new era where we are surrounded with data and designers who are trying to make their way through it, and we're starting to see the impact on behaviors. And one way to think about the future in that context is to figure out who's going to invent that future. Where are the next sets of tools and methodologies going to come from? And I didn't know if the panelists could comment perhaps on where you think that's going to come from, perhaps in terms of disciplines or organizations or bright spots that you see in the world.
I can start from a public policy perspective. I think there's two directions that we can go in. There's a bright side and a dark side of behavioral science and data and its application. Let's start with the positive. On the light side, I think increasing data transparency and analytics will help hold a mirror to our own biases, etc., and help us understand where our own kind of the dark side of our nature is holding us back. So for example, recently, I think it was yesterday, after 850 years, Oxford University finally released its admissions data. And when you analyze it, and I studied at the institution around 30 years ago, but at that time we got the internal data, and it showed that if you went to a private school, you were twice as likely to get in with the same grades. If you were male, you were twice as likely, and if you were if you were white, you were twice as likely. So in the end, I was a 16th less likely to be admitted to this institution. Now that data is out there, and all the well-meaning admissions tutors in the world cannot refute it, but it does start a conversation about how some of the dark side of our nature can be kind of made transparent through the data evidence and analysis, and it can be positive. It can also, I'm also seeing it used really actively to improve policies and programs in areas as wide-ranging as nutrition and international development, all the way through to what works in terms of engaging parents in their children's education in deprived neighborhoods in Boston. And so you see all of these amazing things. And so that's the kind of bright side of where data, transparency, and behavioral science, I think, will take us in the public policy sphere. The dark side really terrifies me. I come from the UK, and I've been following a lot of the stories around Cambridge Analytica and what they did. And they literally harvested our data without our consent to actually, and then kind of used algorithms to try and get into our deepest, darkest fears about each other. And instead of like using our love of each other and our desire to live as a community, they divided us. They sent us adverts saying this other community is winning, and therefore you're losing. And if I see anything, I see this rise of moving from community, and what Cambridge Analytica did was take us from community into a model of a zero-sum game. If Black Lives Matter, that means I'm not black, and therefore my life doesn't matter. And there's no sense of like, and how it can do that, not just for Brexit, not just what it did in the presidential election here, but what it's doing to democracies around the world. It did it with Kenyatta, it did it in Uganda, and I feel that actually the horrible side of our nature, which is the desire to be exclusive and different and better than somebody else, is being pandered to and exploited.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that? Just 'cause I've been thinking about this Cambridge Analytica stuff too. There are also sort of unintended consequences of technology. And again, this idea that data science and now AI is really kind of like traditionally framed as like a techie exercise, like a tech-centric kind of exercise. Following up on that idea about how this data can be used to divide us rather than unite us, the behavioral scientist, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman and Cass Sunstein did an experiment that illustrated this kind of like really important truth about human psychology, which is called group polarization. So they went to Colorado. How many of you guys have heard this story? They went to Colorado. They got groups of people in Colorado Springs, a very conservative place, and Boulder, a very liberal place, right and left. And they got people in each of these cities to form small teams of 4 or 5 people. I'm kind of making up the numbers, but this is the gist. And they had multiple teams in these 2 cities, and they gave these teams issues to discuss, to deliberate about, like gun control, gay marriage, climate change, whatever. And what they found was that, of course, people in Colorado Springs started off to the right of center, and people in Boulder started off to the left center. But what they also found was simply after deliberating, after discussing these issues with people who were sort of like-minded, the modal opinion of people in Colorado Springs moved further to the right than any of the individual people before they started discussing it. And conversely, in Boulder, the modal opinion moved to the left. That's just a feature of human psychology. That when we discuss things with people who are kind of like-minded, we become more sure of our beliefs, and our beliefs become stronger. I think somebody alluded to groupthink in one of the panel discussions earlier. It's related to the idea of groupthink. In fact, Sunstein co-authored a book on groupthink recently, in which he talked about this case study. Now, if you think about this, that like feature of human psychology, and then if you think about the fact that we take these collaborative filtering algorithms that were developed to recommend Netflix movies and books on Amazon or whatever, but now we're applying that to news and opinion pieces and opinion feeds and these things like this. It's like we're pouring gasoline on that little flame, And so it's beyond like just this one malicious use of data. It's just like the built-in structure of these social media feeds. And actually, I heard Cass Sunstein talk about this at the Behavioral Exchange at Harvard a couple of years ago, and he made a brilliant analogy. He said that in the same way that if you're living in a city, if you're just kind of walking from here to the South Loop, and you can make some serendipitous encounters. You can, have a conversation with somebody that kind of changes your view of things in a way you wouldn't have expected. Whereas if you live in a gated community, it won't be the same. You're just living with people who are like you. And he says we've created epistemic gated communities just by the way we've designed our social media. So that's just one example of something that's lacking in AI right now, which is a respect for human psychology and the need for human-centered design.
At a meta level, I'm picking up something you guys might not be obvious to you, but it seems like we're entering an era where there's going to be a lot of cross-disciplinary learning. Yeah. I guess because of the stimulant of us all being connected all the time. In other words, learning that you picked up with transparency of data in London could spread from an educational community to other communities, because suddenly the benefit of good transparency, or the hidden evil, if you will, is suddenly known by everybody. Or the polarization that we see in politics, in your example, Jim, could transfer to other industries as well. So perhaps as designers, we need to keep our eyes open very much to other disciplines to see how they're tackling problems related to this. So I think that's sort of surfaced. So, Francois?
Yeah, I'll actually make a few comments on that because I work in the lovely industries of insurance and financial services, banking. And I think there are phenomenal opportunities to use data for good. So I like to focus on the data for good side. So if you think about insurance industries and what has happened in the past, and I'm sure many of you have had interactions with insurance companies, be it health companies or life insurance companies, your property casualty company. Typically it's not good interactions, especially if you go through the underwriting processes and so up front. But what are these contracts? These are, many of them are 1 year or multi-year life contracts that really are there to protect you for adverse events, right? But what insurers historically have not done is that they haven't used their powers to manage risk, and some of that actually comes through data. So if you think about the US healthcare system, I'd love to see people here indicate who thinks that the system is not broken. And then, one of the big reasons does come down to data. That data is very segmented, it's not shared, etc. Then, on top of that, there comes, now, what if it opens up within governed structures, but what if your doctor becomes aware of your hospital history? If you move from one town to another, your history carries with you, as in national healthcare systems around the world. There comes anxieties and fears with that, but there also comes a lot of opportunity. I think what we've seen with Cambridge Analytica, what has been very interesting, and I'll link it back to the health data, is for the first time people seem to have moved away from the question of asking, what are you doing with my data? If you looked at the information coming up on Facebook, for example, on the trails, it's not just what are you doing with my data, it's actually why do you have my data? I unfriended this person years ago. Why do you actually still have that record? And I think transparency in data is going to become more and more important. And I'll bring it back to the healthcare case. So if you look at health or life insurance, for example, the application processes are horrendous. It takes 4 to 6 weeks to get a life insurance product. One would stand back and say, why is that? You guys are all designers. Who would design a process around 4 or 6 weeks in getting a product? Not in 2018, certainly. But what the insurance companies want to do is they want to protect themselves against adverse risk. So they actually go into your medical records, etc. You don't actually know what medical records, you give them access to your doctors and so you don't know what they see, etc. Another system in the future that we'd like to see is where you can actually offer insurance products within a minute or so. It's being governed off the data that you curate. All your data is transparent to you. All your health records are transparent to you, etc. You know what the insurance company sees. And then insurance companies can use that for good and positive outcomes. So what we do is we use data on an ongoing basis to facilitate positive outcomes. So incentivizing physical activity, nutrition, and so by doing that. And just lastly, I want to mention, we cheated a bit with looking around the corner. About 3 years ago, we did a project with the Institute of the Future, where we asked what would healthcare look like and what would health technology look like in about 15 years, so 2030. So we did a whole panel write-up on it. It's got one of those magical maps that you get from the Institute of the Future. And if you Google Vitality and Institute of the Future, you'll find us. One of the important things to us is the connectedness of data is very important. If you think about research today, a lot of people talked about research. Research is actually pretty opaque. The replicatability of studies is pretty opaque. We'd love to see the systems open. And the development of communities around health, we see good potential. I can talk more, but I'll give my colleagues another opportunity.
So a related question, I think, is as systems become more intelligent, more context aware, more insightful, how can we protect, or how can we help the users? I guess I'll call it that. They have, I think there was a show in Congress in the US recently where somebody printed out the end user agreement for Facebook, and it was like pages and pages and pages. And that's for things that are relatively accessible. And I'm trying to wonder what happens when we have a world of artificial intelligence, when decisions are made on complex policies that are not revealed or maybe even understood by the company that's offering it. But how can we evolve policies so that we as designers know that we're offering something to an audience that can actually consume and understand what it is we've created for them? Yeah. And I don't know if the government level, for instance, there was discussions about that from your work in Government Lab of how do we make systems transparent enough so that people can meaningfully opt into something?
That's a really great question, and I think it's particularly problematic for government because it's opposite in Europe, but here we are less, in the US, citizens are less trusting of the data, government having their data than private companies, whereas it's exactly the opposite in Europe. And so therefore, government has to be especially careful when it's seeking data, it's providing a service. And I think the kind of North Star is always being very transparent about the outcome you're trying to achieve in kind of giving them a service. So I'm giving you this service because I think it will help you pay your taxes on time and are less likely to have a fine. Therefore, this is why I'm doing this. Or I'm doing this because I think I'd like to encourage you to eat better, and therefore you're going to live a longer, happier life with your family, etc. Or I'm asking you to do this because I think it's important that you get engaged in your kids' education. And be very, very clear about it. And that may be kind of giving away some of the kind of like, the nudge factors that kind of like a subliminal. But I think it's being very open and honest about the end result and why you're interacting with someone and why you're asking for their data and giving them that experience. And then people can say, actually, no, I don't care. I don't want to stop smoking. But it's at least the agency is on them.
Right. In the persuasive research community, we often talk about how important mutual goal setting is. We can't persuade somebody to change their behavior if they don't agree with the goal. I mean, so you've got to work that out in some way. So, Jim?
Can I add to that too? Let's see. There's kind of a whack-a-mole aspect to regulation. Like, I think there are two basic ways we can approach this. One is kind of what Francois is saying, which is like companies can take it upon themselves to create pro-social business models. I mean, there are absolutely positive things we can do with data. And I think that if we're creative, this is kind of the theme of the talk I was giving just now in the financial services thing. If we're creative, we can actually use human-centered design in new disciplines like behavioral economics to create data products and AI products that absolutely help us make smarter decisions, nudge us to be healthier, nudge us to save more for retirement. And we can even create artificial intelligence products that make us happier. Like out of Stanford, a clinical psychologist teamed with Andrew Ng and his AI researchers, and they created the Wobot. I said it right, the Wobot. It's a robot, it's a chatbot that administers cognitive behavioral therapy. So AI can make us smarter, can help us make better day-by-day decisions, form better habits, and it can make us happier, or can do just the opposite. So, companies can absolutely innovate in pro-social ways, as Francois is saying, and so that's like the aspiration, or that's the hope, is that people will do that. But I think we need regulation too, and we just need to be smart about it. And but I think we have to be kind of like realistic about what we expect. I was having a conversation with an AI researcher at an AI conference a couple of weeks ago, and he made a really good point, which was that a lot of these algorithms are just going to be opaque no matter what we do. They're based on huge data. They're always updating constantly. They're just going to be really, really complex. Not all algorithms, but many algorithms. So what we're going to need to do is kind of just understand how these algorithms behave. Similarly, the data that these agencies collect about us. Someone in the previous session said, even if these companies gave me all my data, I wouldn't be able to understand it. Well, actually, the behavioral economist Richard Thaler, if he wrote the laws, if he were king, he would write a law, and I think the GDPR is a step in this direction, and maybe it does it. His principle is that if an organization, a government agency, or a business gathers data about me, that data belongs to me, and therefore I'm just lending it to that organization. And the organization, the government agency or the company, should be required to provide you that data back in machine-readable format, a standardized machine-readable format. And again, I can't just look at that, dump it into a spreadsheet and understand it. But what Thaler is that, University of Chicago economist expects is if that happened, you'd have a whole new economy of startups sprouting. It would be essentially design types, it would be machine learning with design that would help you understand your data. So, a very trivial case would be if, I have health goals, or if I have celiac disease, or if my son has, peanut allergies, my supermarket club card data could be used to help me achieve those health goals, a la Vitality, or just simply give me information. No, you don't want that brand of peanuts, you want that brand of cereal over here, whatever it is. If the data, so we can't understand the data, but if it were available in standard format, we wouldn't need, if that would be the regulation, then the markets would kind of do a lot on top of it. So we have to kind of think carefully about how do we want to do this regulation. We want to be kind of smart about it.
Okay. So maybe we have time for some questions from the audience. Give you guys a chance to say some things. Do we have a microphone person out there? Melissa, right up front row. Second row, sorry.
So it's been a great day of lots of user-centered design advocacy, which is fantastic. I work for a cloud-based solutions company, and a lot of what we talk about is transparency for customers of a client company of ours around the data that's being used to help that customer. But many times we have to make the case for the business value. So can you guys speak a little bit to the business value for providing transparency around data and data services? For a company to change, in other words, to take on transparency.
I can actually think of about many, and many are actually in companies have built business models on doing this. For example, if you think about Mint.com, what have they done? They've become an aggregator of data that's typically very hard to get at, somewhat opaque, and now you can actually use that to set your budget, you can get alerts and so on. How we use nutritional data, for example, we know exactly what you shop. So imagine that we're a health insurer, a life insurer, and we also know what you buy at the grocery store. That would freak many people out, but we actually discount the healthy food, and then we provide reports on how you progress over time. And exactly to Jim's point, so the question is, what would the future look like? The future would like, you'd have your goggles and you'd walk through the aisles. We don't need to put markings on it. You know exactly the nutritional contents, and it nudges you. But that's actually not the future, because you're probably not going to walk around in the supermarket as home delivery and other things come up. So now we incentivize home delivery, and you know exactly your content and so on. So I think there are, in our world, we found, especially with health behavior, that data is extremely powerful. Someone mentioned this morning an overload of data. We actually have that problem. I think it was in the energy discussion. Do you give your heart rate per second, or do you just give a summarized version of the day? And that's actually really important. There was a great article in HBR in April. Company Rise.com collected a lot of very detailed information on everyone, on athletes, their heart rates, their movements, etc. And athletes didn't like the product. And IDEO actually worked with them. They went through a big process, followed people around using this app, because they thought, and we often do, especially actuaries as well, we think data is really interesting, people would love it. But they found that what the athletes really wanted to know is they wanted to know what time to go to bed at night to have optimal performance. So I think there's great uses in transparency, but it applies differently to different industries.
I think there's an opportunity to flip the viewpoint on this also. I think every customer loyalty testimony I've ever heard is based on the fact that a company helped me meet my goals.
Yes. Yep.
And if you're making data transparent so that I can inspect it to make sure you know what my goals are, then we'll have a great relationship. Yep. It's when the companies have, I'll call it covert data, and it's wrong,
Yep.
and that's when I get enraged, because they're trying to sell me things I don't need, or they're trying to get me to move somewhere I don't care about or travel somewhere that makes no sense to me.
So we talk about data transparency. Oh, you know that I unfriended Ken in 6th grade and I like cat pictures from Google, X, Y, and Z. If the folks who are using the algorithms don't really know how they work, and I download my data from Google and I see it all there, I'm not really qualified to say, well, Google shouldn't have this data, but this data over here is okay to have. And you know, the companies are naturally going to enjoy an asymmetry of that understanding. Yep. If I think my purchases of shoes on the internet is not valuable, and they find it very valuable, it's very much in the company's interest to leave me feeling like it's not valuable. So I just wonder how we educate people to know what information they ought to protect and what information is being used in their favor.
Okay, it's a great question. Thanks.
Can I float one idea? I mean, one is kind of like harkening back to what we were saying earlier. It's like, in a way, we can't really know. It's kind of beyond human cognition. I mean, ironically, we need kind of like algorithms to help us understand the value of the data. No, really, but it's a matter of flipping it around. That's why the Thaler idea of like you own your data is so brilliant, and that will create an economy of like the equivalent of like TripAdvisor or Kayak for your data. Like, so if you're getting soaked by the mobile phone company, they send you your bill. It's like 20 pages. Who's read a 20-page cell phone bill? But if it were a digital format, you could upload it into like mycellphone.com, and it'll say, no, you don't want this one, you want this one over here. That'll save you some money. I really think that's the way to do it. Otherwise, we just really have no sense of it. I'll just also plug an author, like Jaron Lanier. Have you guys read Jaron Lanier? Yeah, he's written these books. You Are Not a Gadget, and Who Owns the Future. And he also makes the economic case for this too. It's like, if the people that gather the data own it, we're going to have these huge asymmetries in wealth in society too. Whereas really the people that generate the data, I mean, he has this thought experiment about how they should be given micropayments every time they like something or friend somebody, because they're generating this little valuable data. So he would actually like to set up an economy. That's the thought experiment he goes through, like set up an economy whereby people get micropayments. So I think that the Lanier and the Thaler are two different ideas, for kind of quantifying economically the value of this data. Anyway.
Other comments on that question?
It's slightly related, but it's more about kind of the role of data in itself and evidence and analysis and facts. If I could go back in a time machine and I could bet against a currency, I would bet against evidence, analysis, and facts, as we seem to be in a post-fact world. And I think, it's more of a plea.
You're shorting the Enlightenment.
It's more of a plea that as designers, as people who develop policies and programs, to be true and to the integrity of the facts. Now, in some cases, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care how big someone's inauguration crowd is, but I really do care if someone is making decisions and investing in policies and programs that are harmful and have shown to be harmful. And so I think we owe it to ourselves not just to kind of design great programs on what we think is going to work or not, but really do our very, very best to get under the underpinning kind of analysis and the work that's gone on and tread in the footsteps of the giants before us, to really learn from the past and to continuously evolve this rather than just throw out random ideas because we think they sound cool. And so, another area, and people seem to be going into this world where if they don't like a fact, they'll just make up a different one and it's okay. But it's not okay. Climate change is real, and it's not okay to say it isn't. And I think the integrity of a community relies on being true to the truth and being true to the kind of like the evidence and the analysis that has gone on before.
Okay, and a quick comment.
Just a quick comment on that. Jim and I actually talked earlier today that if we can develop a truth algorithm, that would be exceptionally well served at this time. I just want to make one quick closing remark, because we talk about the future and we ask, so you work in design fields and we work in experimentation fields, what does it mean to our work? If anyone here has experienced that they design something and then it gets to implementation and the world has moved on, I'm sure some of you have experienced that it's just going to accelerate. we're going to see absolute acceleration in how the world changes and so on, and our design thinking needs to accommodate that, which means we need quicker feedback systems, we need better services and so on that helps our design.
Can I say one last thing from me? It's like, yeah, I think that like the technology is going to be the easy part. The hard part is ensuring that societal values and human values are reflected in that technology, and that's ultimately a design issue. So I think that's a great challenge for the design community.
Okay, great. Thank you to the panel, and thanks to the audience for your great questions. And I think this is the end of the segment. Thanks.
We were trying out a few different things here, and in true design fashion, prototyping and iterating and testing is reliant on feedback. And I know as soon as you walk out the door, a survey is like the last thing you're going to think about, but you will be receiving one. It will be digital. Please answer it. It's really valuable. It will be read. It will be useful. So appreciate any thoughts you have, positive, negative, neutral, all really valuable to us. So thank you in advance for that. We do have a part 2. So tomorrow, this was more of our kind of more conference style day. Tomorrow we will be having workshops. So ID faculty in a variety of disciplines will be giving 3-hour workshops. They will not be occurring here. If you look at the back of your program book, if you are signed up for day 2, these events will actually be held at ID at the school, which is sort of west of the loop. At 565 West Adams. So if you are signed up for those and you come here, you will be crashing somebody else's event. So don't do that. And unfortunately, we would love to have an open door policy, and if you weren't able to sign up, say come and join. Unfortunately, we're at capacity, so apologies for that. But those are also a prototype. And so one of the things we're going to be testing is how we might run kind of short cycle workshops or kind of more modularized ways of bringing continuing education to continue to have a conversation. There will be a lecture though, so in a little over an hour there's one final event in this space, and I forgot to bring my book up with me, so I don't have the lecture name memorized. Sorry. Yes, it's about sustainability. William Rosenzweig. It's supposed to be very, very good, very thoughtful, and a moderated panel there too. That also has been sold out to capacity in terms of seating. You are welcome to stay with standing room though. So we do want to sort of open the door to that. Just want to make it clear for folks who registered, seats are for them. And unless there's anything else, I think that is, yes?
How do we get access to all of the decks that were presented?
That is a great question. We will circle back, and we have everyone's contact information, so Madeline will probably end up being your point person for that. So we will deal with that after the fact. So I think that's it for me. I did want to hand off the mic quickly to Dennis Weil, our dean, to give a few other closing thoughts, and then we will transition to the evening.
Good evening. So I'm mostly up here to actually thank Ruth and John, but before I do that, I just quickly want to say that how excited I am that we be able to close the first day of this conference. This conference is really an expression of where the faculty, the work we have done as a faculty on what we call Next ID, where we think the Institute of Design needs to go. And it was born out of kind of two main analyses. One is, what's the unique role of design in today's world? And we think it's about busting complexity, kind of directing creativity and mobilizing actions. And I think the mobilizing action is obviously into complexity are the more newer ones, or the ones that require new methods, new behaviors. And the second one was, what's the unique role that ID needs to play within design, or rather ecosystem? And as the only graduate-only design school in the US, there are only actually 3 in the world, but it has been our role, and we've played that role forever, to kind of be the practice leadership. So we are out because we don't have to train 8 different design disciplines in undergraduate. We have been focused on what's next. And it became very clear to us that because of the complexity and because of the shift of the difficulty not being anymore the thinking or the planning or the strategy or coming up with great ideas, but that the bigger challenge is actually how do you scale something to really get impact, and the idea of mobilizing action, that this cannot happen anymore in design only, that it really, this needs to happen at the design intersections. Designers can't do alone a solution to synthetic biology and biodesign. The same, obviously, for the conference today in all the AI thing. But design has a unique role. It's just like the kind of the societal values come to life. So that was kind of the birth of this idea of the Design Intersections conference. And the idea of I think the task is, one, to kind of explore what was done today, what are some of the new practices, what are some of the new principles, and therefore what are some of the methods that could be developed. But I think the second thing, and probably the harder thing, is that for the designers in the room, and I hope there is 50% or less, because the whole idea of this convening was to make it interdisciplinary. For design as a practice, I think it's a culture shift. I think we are getting to the point with design where we need to move away from being inward-looking to being outward-looking. And I think it has an impact on who we talk to. There's an impact on how we get involved, so that we actually stay with it and feel responsible and take ownership for the actualization. And I think that's part of why we like convenings like that. While it still has the word design in it, perhaps in future we have to come up with something else that doesn't only by design. I think that's where we're going. So I hope you experienced both new ideas and new methods, as well as a sense for what kind of a new culture could look like. So lastly, it was just a thanks. We had this idea. We sat down in October. I remember it was Ruth, John Kane, and myself. Both Ruth and John joined as visiting professors just a month earlier, probably did not knowing what they were into. And we thought, how would it be if we could do a conference on this? And that was really the last meeting I had on this, and then I just showed up today. So all the thanks really goes to John Kane, and particularly Ruth, who is the chair of this conference and has done such an amazing job with the team that she just already thanked. And I just want to personally thank you to make this happen. It was a great day. And we have a great lecture coming. So lastly, just on I have the sheet on the lecture, so I can advertise the lecture. It's William Rosenzweig, who is a social impact fellow at Haas School at the University of Berkeley, and also involved in the Culinary Institute. He's a long-time food social entrepreneur. The theme of his lecture is Systems, Stomata, and Serendipity, Accelerating the Sustainability Revolution, and it's focused how designers and entrepreneurs can generate systems innovation that rapidly address the world's most pressing social and ecological problems. So please join us, standing room, and thanks for coming, and see you probably tomorrow, some of you.